Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Donald Trump has accused the media of distorting his response to white supremacist protests as he shared a rally with stalwart supporters in Arizona. The president said his response to the riots in Virginia, in which a woman was killed, was perfect. Our US correspondent Greg Milam reports from Phoenix.
The scenes on the streets outside of where the President of the United States had just finished speaking. Can there be any better illustration of the simmering tensions in America right now?
Peaceful!
Protesters and police facing off in Phoenix in Arizona, where Donald Trump had come to rally his support. This was the culmination of a day in which it was clear how divisive he is here.
Don't worry, don't worry. No Trump! No KKK! No fascist USA!
Awaiting him in Phoenix, thousands of protesters exchanging insults with Trump supporters, queuing to hear him speak.
We don't accept your wall of hate, impeach!
Trump's immigration policies and his equivocal response to what happened in Charlottesville raised temperatures in the 41-degree heat. Inside, it was a friendly crowd, and at first he stuck to the teleprompter script.
What happened in Charlottesville strikes at the core of America. And tonight, this entire arena stands united in forceful condemnation of the thugs who perpetrate hatred and violence.
From there, though, he spent 20 minutes defending himself and attacking the media.
He didn't say it fast enough. He didn't do it on time. Why did it take a day? He must be a racist. It took a day.
He neglected to mention he'd condemned many sides for that violence. If the faithful loved it, he was reopening a damaging issue for his presidency. And outside, he'd won few over.
We had the darkening with the eclipse yesterday and the darkening with him today. I don't know what Arizona did to deserve that, but...
He fails to realize, distinguish between the fascists and those opposing it.
I don't care for the president, and I don't care for his beliefs.
This was Donald Trump's first visit to the American West since he became president, and 24 hours after a speech that many saw as measured and one which was certainly scripted. This was the off-the-cuff, real Donald Trump that his supporters have come to love. Trump did offer perhaps hope on North Korea.
Kim Jong-un, I respect the fact that I believe he is starting to respect us. I respect that fact.
But this was a president unloading his frustrations and repeating campaign promises on immigration and health that mean whatever his calls for unity, America remains as divided as ever. Greg Milam, Sky News, Phoenix, Arizona.
Kim Jong-un is beginning to respect the United States, so said the president just there. Let's speak to Dr. Jacob Parakilas from the Chatham House think tank at the US and America's programme that's part of it. Doctor, welcome to you. Does he have a point, do you think? Has this recent war of words, American actions, made Kim Jong-un start to respect America more than it did before?
I don't think there's been a manifest change in the way North Korea behaves towards the U.S. specifically. Obviously, North Korea's military programs, its ballistic missile programs, its nuclear programs have been underway for some time. They've accelerated in the last few months. The North Koreans are prone to issuing extreme threats against the United States, which almost always are not carried out. So the idea that this is some fundamental sea change in their behavior driven by Trump's rhetoric, by his behavior, by his being, I don't think there's anything to support that.
When you say the programme's been accelerated, I mean, we're familiar with some of the headlines that have come through recently about miniaturisation of nuclear warheads, ICBMs that may be capable of going further than before, etc., etc., etc. But I suppose what people want to know is whether that would have happened if Hillary Clinton was in office and to what extent it was slowed down by the diplomatic efforts under Obama.
I don't think I can speak to the sort of specifics of the missile programs, but it's clear that these things have been underway for a long time. I think it's clear that there's very little the U.S. could have done under any president, Trump, Clinton, or anyone else, which would have made a manifest difference in the last 6 to 7 months. So I think in a way Trump is dealing with a situation that any American president in his position would have had to deal with. The question in the long term is, will he be able to manage this? Will he be able to put the two countries on a de-escalatory path after the sort of increasing amped up rhetoric over the last few months? The really important thing, though, is that there hasn't been a corresponding ramping up of American military activity. There are long scheduled military exercises, but there isn't a sort of, beyond that, any kind of signifier that the U.S. is planning real military action against North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth reflecting on those exercises, isn't it? I mean, the Chinese have criticised, well, through one of their state-run tabloid newspapers, they've been critical of the South Koreans for going ahead with these largely computer-simulated exercises. But, at the end of the day, they happen every year. The rhetoric's ramped up. We've grown used to that almost ritualistic tit-for-tat.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the North Koreans, as I say, tend to issue very strong statements against the U.S. There are references to seas of fire and, absolute destruction, that sort of thing. It's a bit unusual to have the U.S. coming back with similarly amped up rhetoric, but I'm not sure that it manifestly changes the odds of a military or indeed nuclear confrontation with actual violence and death on the peninsula.
It's just worth labouring this point, though, isn't it, that, Trump supporters, even Trump agnostics, might say, well, look, it wasn't working, the softly approach wasn't working before under Obama. Try something new. He's trying something new. Whether it works or not remains to be seen.
Well, the thing is, I'm not sure he is actually trying anything particularly new, aside from this sort of increase in rhetoric, which I doubt is going to shape North Korean responses in any real meaningful way. He's not engaging. He has managed to get some new sanctions passed, but again, that was a 15-0 vote in the United Nations Security Council. I think that would have been a victory for any administration, and he should be given credit. His administration should be given credit for shepherding that through, but I think you have to judge Trump not just by the standard of would Hillary Clinton be managing this, but what's the long-term prognosis? What's the long-term trend in U.S.-Korean relations? And, in general, no president has really successfully managed this really complicated issue.
Jacob Parakilas is with Chatham House, the think tank based in London. Doctor, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot.
President Donald Trump has launched a ferocious attack on the media, calling journalists dishonest and sick people. Speaking at a rally of supporters in Phoenix, Arizona, Mr. Trump said the media had failed to report accurately his comments about the violent behaviour of far-right nationalists in Charlottesville 2 weeks ago. From Phoenix, James Cook reports.
Donald Trump loves to wind it up. It's how he won the presidency, railing against elites in government, on Wall Street and in the media. But the campaign ended 9 months ago. Not that you would know it.
The live red lights, they're turning those suckers off fast out there.
For fully half an hour in Phoenix, the president lambasted the news media. He was animated, even angry, as he blamed the intense criticism of his erratic response to white supremacist violence on treacherous reporters.
These are really, really dishonest people, and they're bad people. And I really think they don't like our country. I really believe that.
President Trump took his war with the media to a new level tonight, attacking journalists again and again. He clearly regards his best defense from criticism as a full-throated attack on the messenger.
But the audience were delighted, and they also loved his promise to secure the border with Mexico.
Now, the obstructionist Democrats would like us not to do it, but believe me, if we have to close down our government, we're building that wall.
Designs for the wall are slowly taking shape. One idea, favoured in principle by the president, is for it to be covered in solar panels. But it would only stretch for perhaps a quarter of the 2,000-mile frontier. The initial outlay would be huge, and he would need Congress to approve the spending.
Yeah, a bit of point. Sounds like the initial outlay is going to be quite high.
We're using a number, it's gone up, but it's $7.5 million. And that $7.5 million is within their budget.
To cover how great a distance?
$7.5 million a mile.
Right.
Hands up, don't shoot! Hands up, don't shoot!
Back in the border state of Arizona, the anger is frothing. After the rally, it bubbled over on the streets, police using tear gas to disperse a hard core of protesters. The trouble didn't last long. The controversy surrounding the president, by contrast, goes on and on. James Cook, BBC News, Phoenix.
Now, police have fired tear gas and rubber bullets at protesters outside a Donald Trump rally in Phoenix, Arizona. President Trump was inside, attacking the media and insisting he had done enough to condemn neo-Nazis. But as our correspondent Robert Moore reports from there, it's claimed that police may have overreacted to a largely peaceful protest.
Nazis go home! Nazis go home! Nazis go home!
This time it was Phoenix in the grip of politically fueled turmoil. In the shadow of an inflammatory Trump rally, thousands of protesters were on the streets.
God bless America, not just black lives, all lives matter.
It was peaceful at first.
You guys denounce Antifa? Take the stand.
But everywhere we looked, bitter arguments were breaking out on street corners.
They fly the communist hammer. Oh, you have nothing else to say.
Politics now poisonous and deeply personal.
Say, what has he done? What has he done?
Then, from our clear vantage point, for no good reason, the Phoenix police lost patience and overreacted.
The mayor of Phoenix had warned Donald Trump to stay away, saying his presence here would be gasoline on the fire. And so it is proven. The police are now being deployed, trying to disperse this crowd.
They're shooting rubber bullets, and there's no reason for it. They're totally peaceful at the front, and the police are immediately shooting rubber bullets.
And then we said, peaceful protest, we all threw our hands up like this, and then they went pat, 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 and then shots were rubber bullets. Pat, 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 pat.
With tear gas wafting across the city, dozens of people were in real distress, including children. And those on both sides, and the anger with the police was palpable. Some of the scenes were being broadcast live on TV.
And a guy just got shot with a rubber bullet.
Inside the rally, which Trump described as perfect, the president railed against the media, blaming its coverage for the great rift opening up across America.
If you want to discover the source of the division in our country, look no further than the fake news and the crooked media.
His performance last night alarmed many people, a former top intelligence official even questioning Trump's mental stability, taking that whispered notion mainstream.
And the complete intellectual, moral, and ethical void that the President of the United States exhibits. And how much longer does the country have to borrow a phrase, endure this nightmare?
The scenes here overnight were disturbing, not least because almost everyone is convinced that the political fury we are witnessing is set to continue. Robert Moore, ITV News, in Phoenix, Arizona.
I want to bring in now CNN national security analyst James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence. Mr. Clapper, thank you so much for joining us. What did you think of tonight's performance by President Trump?
Well, Don, it's hard to know where to start. It's just so objectionable on so many levels. You know, I've toiled in one capacity or another for every president since and including John F. Kennedy through President Obama. And I don't know when I've listened and watched something like this from a president that I found more disturbing. Having some understanding of the levers of power that are available to a president if he chooses to exercise them, I found this downright scary and disturbing. I think Bakari is right on the money, though, that this is not a surprise. Interesting to contrast last night's teleprompter Trump performance versus tonight, which is, of course, the real Trump, just as it was in the unglued impromptu press conference at Trump Tower. So I just find this extremely disturbing.
Are you questioning his fitness?
Yes, I do. I really question his ability to, his fitness to be in this office. And I also am beginning to wonder about his motivation for it. Maybe he is looking for a way out. I do wonder as well about the people that attracted to this rally as others. You know, what are they thinking, or why am I so far out off base? Because I don't understand the adulation, and of course that's why I think he gravitated to having this rally as ill-timed as it is. He should have quit while he was ahead after last night, but again, I think the real Trump came through, and again, as Bakari said, shouldn't be a big surprise to anyone.
What should we do? What should Washington do at this point? You said you're questioning his fitness. There are many people who are saying it. They won't say it publicly. They don't have the courage that you do. Maybe after this speech they will now. It will become painfully obvious to, as it is to most Americans. What should we do?
Well, I think, you know, the key thing here is where is he with Republicans? And I was quite struck by Senator Corker's remarks. Very thoughtful and very, very measured. And I know Senator Corker, I've dealt with him, and he is a very thoughtful senator. And he wouldn't say that lightly and without forethought. And I'm hopeful that other similarly thoughtful Republicans will reach the point where enough is enough.
Enough is enough. And what do you mean? Be plain for us.
Well, that this behavior and this divisiveness and the complete intellectual, moral, and ethical void that the President of the United States exhibits. And how much longer does the country have to borrow a phrase, endure this nightmare?
The New York Times is reporting tonight about the falling out between the president and Mitch McConnell over the investigations of Russia's interference in the 2016 election. There you see the headline up on the screen. The report says the president was furious that McConnell failed to protect him. You call the accusations of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia worse than Watergate. What do you think is going on with the president? Why is this such a hot button for him?
Well, first, to be clear, Don, when I left, certainly on the 20th of January, I had not seen any evidence of a direct collusion between the Trump campaign, the Trump camp, and the Russians. There may have been collusion, but I didn't have any evidence of it. So I don't understand, frankly, the president's fascination and solicitousness of Russia and Putin, particularly, unless he feels he's a kindred soul, perhaps. So it is very strange to me, and I don't have an explanation for it. I don't know if it's collusion or something else.
You said you question his fitness. Is he a threat to national security, the president?
Well, he certainly could be. Again, having some understanding of the levers that a president can exercise, I worry about, frankly, the access to nuclear codes. If he, in a fit of pique, he decides to do something about Kim Jong-un, there's actually very little to stop them. The whole system's built to ensure a rapid response if necessary. So there are very little in the way of controls over, exercising a nuclear option, which is pretty damn scary.
Do you see this as a crisis, Mr. Clapper?
Well, I'm not sure what the definition of a crisis is. If it is, we've been in it for quite a while. Certainly since the election. I have to say, Don, I couldn't help but think in the course of the Charlottesville, his statements about Charlottesville, when he was so quick to characterize the intelligence community as Nazis, liken us to Nazis on the 10th of January, yet seemed very reluctant to call out the real wannabe Nazis in this case. And maybe that's I'm being a little parochial here and defensive about the intelligence community, but that's one thought I had. So I think if it is a crisis, we've been in it for quite a while.
What do you think other intelligence officials now and people who have some sway in Washington, what are the conversations they're having tonight, and what will they be having tomorrow, you think?
Well, I think
after this speech,
I think many people in the intelligence community, certainly in rank and file, are worried, are concerned about this. And it's a tradition in the intelligence community to carry on with the mission and provide the intelligence that our decision makers so desperately need. And they'll continue to do that. But I think in moments of personal reflection, I suspect they are greatly concerned about the divisiveness that is taking hold of this country.
James Clapper is a former director of national intelligence, and we thank you, Mr. Clapper. Thank you for your service to the country. We thank you for coming on this evening.
Now, President Trump may have opened his speech to supporters in Phoenix last night with calls for unity, but it wasn't long before he was giving full rein to his own anger, slamming the media, his own Republican Party and Congress, threatening a government shutdown. As his 77-minute rampage came to a close, angry protests outside ended in clouds of smoke and tear gas. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris is in Phoenix now. Kylie.
Fatima, yeah, there is something about Phoenix that brings out the red meat populist in this president. Only on Monday night, we had a very carefully scripted statement on Afghanistan. But again, last night, the president was back to peak Trump. He loves feeding off the audience in these live events, these rallies, and he hit all their pressure points, railing against immigration, talking about the wall, talking about cowardly Republicans, obstructionist Democrats. This was not a unifying speech of a president who was riding high. It was a leader bitter at a lack of recognition, spouting vitriol. The mayor of Phoenix had asked him not to come, fearing scenes just like this. After Charlottesville, he warned the president could again ignite racial tension. But this is the deliberately flash-bang presidency. And there were flashes of anger inside the hall as well as out.
The only people giving a platform to these hate groups is the media itself and the fake news. These are really, really dishonest people, and they're bad people. And I really think they don't like our country. I really believe that.
Before he began to speak, his supporters reclaimed the streets of Phoenix. They came in their thousands to stare down the haters.
For me, it was because they keep calling him racist, and I wouldn't vote for a man that was racist.
Bonnie and Eldon Hayes drove up from Tucson. They're both registered Democrats, but voted for Trump.
I mean, we're going backwards. You know, 4 years, he's going to be out. Vote him out. It's so simple, you know, but they're making all this ruckus over nothing. And, you know, that's what democracy's about. Unless you want to be in a third world country where you're scared to say who you voted for, because that's what it's coming down to.
Supporters paraded by the protesters to get inside to hear the president. Like them, he said, he's a victim of a biased media, a corrupt establishment and a destructive and militant political opposition. He couldn't stop talking about Charlottesville.
But I don't want to bore you with this, but it shows you how dishonest they are.
He brought along a copy of the statement he made on the day Heather Heyer was killed demonstrating against white supremacists.
Yeah, this is me speaking. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. That's me speaking on Saturday.
But he left something out. He actually said,
this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
And that matters because that, together with his tirade in New York last week, suggested a moral equivalency between neo-Nazis and people protesting against them. President Trump didn't have to repeat it, though, because his supporters already believe it. You're both carrying guns today. Why'd you bring your guns along tonight? Isn't this meant to be a peaceful protest?
Walking around with a gun is not causing violence. Walking around with a gun.
Doesn't it create conditions for escalation, potentially?
If you're bad people, then yeah. If you're a normal, regular, law-abiding citizen, it shouldn't bother you at all.
And where's the danger from?
Antifa, Black Lives Matter, terrorists, you name it, they're here.
Do they have reason to be worried?
Antifa is just a response to protecting the nonviolent protesters, to act as that buffer between the nonviolent and the neo-Nazis.
But if you're just being a buffer, why do you need to cover your face?
And I'm not about being identified, especially living in a red state where you can be actively attacked.
Black Lives Matter! 8 months into this presidency and the dividing line between those who support President Trump and those who oppose him couldn't be any clearer. Here they're shouting you're on the wrong side of history, but on that side they're saying they're making history. This is a new America.
Go back to Africa. Go back to Europe.
Our movement is a movement built on love. It's love for fellow citizens.
But it's also a movement that divides on America's streets and on America's borders.
And we are building a wall on the southern border, which is absolutely necessary. Now, the obstructionist Democrats would like us not to do it, but believe me, we have to close down our government. We're building that wall.
Racists go home! Racists go home!
But the obstructionist Democrats aren't going anywhere.
We're in this for the long haul. We're not going to go quietly. Our attention's not going to be distracted. We're going to keep turning out, and we'll see on Election Day 2018 how things turn out.
The event is now closed. They are not allowing any more people inside.
As the night drew on and thousands of Trump supporters were turned away, it came to this. There were guns now on both sides. Left-wing vigilantes had joined the melee. I'm just a bit unnerved by the fact that you've got a pistol on your hip.
That's there for your protection as well.
Thankfully, it wasn't gunfire, but a firecracker thrown by protesters that scattered the crowd. The police responded with pepper balls and tear gas at close range. Everyone quickly forced to disperse. Some lingered with stinging eyes to make a peaceful stand, but their gesture was all but lost in the heat of the night. I'm joined now by two Republicans here in Phoenix. Mike Broomhead is a conservative talk show host, and Phil Boas is the editorial page editor of the local newspaper, the Arizona Republic. Mike, can I come to you first? What's your impression of the words that Donald Trump had to say to the nation last night?
I thought the president was preaching to the choir a little bit. He had a room full of supporters, and I thought what he did was kind of defend his positions, position himself on the civil rights movement and what he said about Charlottesville, which I thought was important to do. I think he could have done a little bit of a better job of addressing the fact that Alveda King was with him, and who was the niece of Martin Luther King Jr., and the unity part of it, of unifying people and saying we really are one nation, and a little less of going after the media, I think would have been better. But I still think he did a good job for what he was trying to do, which was get his base re-energized.
I mean, he seems to talk about unity pretty much in terms of if you're unified if you're behind him. If you're not behind him, you're a hater.
Well, I think I caught it a little bit differently. I think unity in his sense is that he doesn't mind differences of opinion, but it's the us against them mentality all the time that he seems to feed into that he's also speaking out against. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword with him, maybe.
Phil Boas, us against them? I mean, were these the healing words that America needed to hear last night after Charlottesville?
No, and I don't think Donald Trump is capable of healing, of doing these grace notes that you need to bring the country together after something as complex and divisive as Charlottesville. He's a populist. He was sent there by his voters to Washington, D.C. to destroy things. And so it really isn't in him to then turn around and be a guy who can pull the country together after something like Charlottesville.
As a Republican, though, how do you deal with the fact that we spoke to 100 people last night out in the street who were there? They don't care about the fact that he's not getting health care through. They don't care about the fact they'd quite like to see tax reform. But generally, any missteps that he's made, they're prepared to forgive because they want him. Their support for him is immensely strong.
Well, this is a frustrated Republican base. They view Barack Obama as the radical. They don't see Donald Trump as that. They see him as the guy who sounds their themes, who talks like them, and who expresses their rage. So.
Isn't he blowing up the Republican Party at the same time as expressing his rage? Maybe you think that's a good thing, Mike.
Well, I don't know if it's a good thing. I think that they haven't gotten anything done. Congress is very unpopular, and I think he plays into that. And so when he talks about, we're going to talk about go talk to your senators because we are one vote away from getting some health care reform done, I think he's gone there from a frustrated public. Republicans, we've had overspending, and it's all been Republicans in the Congress. I think their demand for something getting done, he's playing on that pretty well. But I think, as Phil just said, we're having a rough time with unifying everybody. And that's where the danger is, because we're not able to accomplish anything because there's always this fighting that's going on.
I mean, there are reports he can't even talk to Mitch McConnell at the moment. They're not on speaking terms. This is the Republican Senate Majority Leader. I mean, you guys got everything you wanted in the election. You got the House, you got the Senate, you got the White House, and still the Republican agenda isn't really being furthered.
But I also think that's a two-way street. Mitch McConnell has got to be able to get the Republican caucus together to get some things done. There is a fair amount of the frustration is fair coming from Donald Trump, but on the other side, the way he's handling that frustration is unpresidential at times, and I think that's what's frustrating the other people that are saying, you guys just need to sit down and get something done.
I mean, what about in Arizona? You've got very different kinds of Republican politicians. You've got John McCain here, you know, Jeff Flake, two of the biggest Republican critics of Donald Trump. He threw them under the bus last night too.
Yeah, but they're kind of used to it. I mean, it goes both ways, doesn't it? I mean, they've been quite critical of Trump as well. So, I mean, you see a bunch of payback going on. I think what McConnell is doing now is payback to Trump and the way he treated him. They'll be locking arms again. You watch. I mean, they'll come together and they'll want to push through a Republican agenda again.
I mean, we are at the point where we've seen very serious cases of political violence. You had who police say was a white supremacist driving his car at a bunch of protesters in Charlottesville, killing Heather Heyer. Steve Scalise, a Republican congressman, was shot by a self-proclaimed Bernie Sanders supporter. We're just learning that he may well not walk again. I mean, this is a time when President Trump surely has to put aside this vitriol and actually get on with governing.
I just think the problem, though, is if you saw what happened in Phoenix last night, there were 20 or 30,000 people in the streets between protesters and supporters, only 4 arrests, and one of them was a warrant that had nothing to do with protest. I think it also has to do with the society we live in. This place we live is very passionate, but they also are reasonable people. That no one's inciting violence because we won't be incited to violence. I think that's just kind of who we are here.
Let's hope that's true. Mike Brimhead and Phil Burrs, thank you very much for joining us. Now it's back to you in London.
Thanks very much, Kylie.
The next US election is on the 3rd of November 2020. But for President Trump, the campaigning is well underway. In the early hours of this morning, our time, the president took to the stage for nearly an hour and a half at his Make America Great Again rally in Phoenix, Arizona. It was a classic Trump performance, one of promise, defense, accusation and insult. Some of his most barbed comments were made about the, as he would put it, fake news media, blaming them for giving far-right groups a platform. We'll talk about that in a moment. But first, Gabriel Gatehouse reports from Phoenix, where America's increasingly polarized political debate spilled out onto the streets.
Bikers for Trump. They came to Phoenix to show support for their president, and they said to stop protesters from harassing those who wanted to attend the rally. Charlottesville is still fresh in the memory. 2 radically opposing visions for America clashed. Blood was spilled. People died.
We don't want to see anybody get hurt, you know.
The bikers condemned white supremacists and neo-Nazis. So eventually did Donald Trump. but he was slow and equivocal. Many saw in him a president who emboldened racists.
And for all of us here, Father, to go and protect people from threats of violence from protesters. And Father, would you say?
But America is in the grip of a cultural war so polarizing, you might wonder whether the two sides lived on the same planet.
Obama, for the last 8 years, has emboldened people to come out and be violent because there's been no consequences for any of it. And he's telling people, you know, that the only person in the world that can be a racist is a white man. You know, I mean, so yeah, it concerns me that that's the atmosphere in the country today.
Off camera, one man told me he hated black people. On camera, others rejected the Ku Klux Klan. They were more reticent, but no less angry.
I think they're trying to start a civil war, to be honest.
Who is?
The government.
Why?
I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, I'll be the first to take up arms, man. Take up arms. Take up arms for my country. You know, if they come down on our soil, I'm ready to defend it. That's just the way I look at it. All these other liberals now are all goody-goody, and they want everybody just to, you know, oh this and oh that, you know, but you know what, nothing ever gets done. It's all talk, it's all behind doors. We need to bring more stuff out, get things more done.
And do you think Donald Trump is getting things done?
Slowly, yes, he's trying. I believe that he's really trying. He's got to clean up the mess before he can, you know, he's got to clean up the parking lot to make it look good.
Shame on you! Shame on you!
In downtown Phoenix, protesters gathered throughout the sweltering afternoon as they watched Donald Trump's supporters arrive.
Shame on you, racist! No Nazi sympathizers! Get out of here!
Each side taunted the other across a police cordon designed to prevent a repeat of Charlottesville.
If you get shot by a police officer while resisting arrest, you might bleed out and die.
It's really extraordinary that a visit by a sitting president, with all the respect that Americans have for that office, can produce this kind of reaction. But the gulf now between this side and that side is so great, it's very hard to see them finding any kind of common ground at all.
USA! USA! USA!
Both sides invoke those same three letters. But in Trump's America, they're having trouble agreeing on what USA should actually mean.
Do any of you have any understanding about where the people on the other side of the barricades are coming from? You do? You do? Raise your hand if you do. You have family, right? Tell me about that.
They feel very strongly that what Mr. Trump began with, the ideas about the economy, meant something and that he could make change. And they, I don't think, are willing to now say, that's not working. It's backfiring and it's turning into a campaign of hate. And we're having trouble talking to each other. So if that's happening in my own family, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people over there are having those same kinds of emotion.
Arizona has some of the most relaxed gun laws anywhere in the United States, and on both sides, weapons were paraded in plain sight.
I'm an American. I was born and raised here.
There were some angry confrontations, but no violence between Donald Trump's supporters and his detractors. His presidency may be divisive, but it is also invigorating political debate.
Trump's getting nothing done. The only thing he's signed is legislation to take away what
Obama
Obama
because he's signed more.
I'm right.
You're wrong.
Inside the conference center, the president was on classic form. Untethered from the teleprompter, his routine is a compelling hybrid.
He didn't say it fast enough. He didn't do it on time. Why did it take a day? He must be a racist. It took a day.
Part stand-up comedy, part demagoguery.
But the very dishonest media, those people right up there with all the cameras.
He spent much of the rally quoting selectively from his own response to Charlottesville while accusing the media of doing exactly that. This was Donald Trump in his element, with all his contradictions, and his audience loved him for it. By the time it was over, night had fallen, The protesters were still there, and the police presence had increased.
There were slaves before America.
There were more heated arguments, detailed debates about race, crime, and statistics.
You're holding the numbers, and you're lying.
No.
Hold, you're reading them, and you're lying.
Look at the percentages per capita of the representation in the United States.
It's about total.
No,
Yes,
it's
it
per
is, 'cause then
capita.
But trouble came not between supporters and opponents of the president, but between protesters and the police.
You have a responsibility, not to him, but to us.
Officers said the anti-Trump demonstrators threw rocks and bottles. They responded with tear gas, pepper spray, and flashbangs.
Shit! Go, go, go!
Well, the police are advancing now. All the people from the rally have been led away, and this is now between the police and the anti-Trump protesters. It took several hours to clear the streets. Acrid clouds of tear gas lingered as the protesters dispersed. It was heavy-handed, but they'd kept the peace. The day ended without serious violence, but with divisions as entrenched as ever.
Gabriel Gatehouse reporting. Now, if there's a debate about how voters see Trump, there's no question over how the president sees the press. In his latest attack, he said it's time to expose the crooked media deceptions and accuse the journalists of fomenting divisions, trying to take away America's history and heritage. So is this bluster or a real threat to the relationship between the press, the White House and the public? And how much blame does a partisan press have to take? Eugene Robinson is the chair of the Pulitzer Prize Board, also associate editor of the Washington Post. He joins us now from Washington. Initially then, your reaction to what we heard from the president in Phoenix.
Well, it worries me, and speaking with my Pulitzer Prize hat on right now, these kinds of attacks, you know, we're used to politicians running against the media. That's a standard sort of technique, and we have thick skin. If you're a journalist, you ought to have a thick skin. That's fine. President Trump's rhetoric is something we have not heard. He has referred to the media as enemies of the American people. He has said, as he did last night, they don't love their country. They don't want to make America great. They don't want to let us make America great. And he has escalated the rhetoric in a way that frankly worries me. That it could be dangerous, and it's very troubling. And I think it's something that we need to speak out about.
Define dangerous.
Well, you perhaps are familiar with the Pizzagate story. Do you know that whole story? The emails of Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, yes, John Podesta, were hacked, and a lot of them were about ordering pizza, because that's what political campaigns do. People, yes, work into the night, they miss dinner, they order pizza. Conspiracy theorists saw these pizza emails and deduced that there must be some sort of code, and somehow leapt to the conclusion that Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile ring out of a specific pizza restaurant here in Washington. And so, a month after the election, a man from North Carolina drove to Washington, went to that restaurant carrying a loaded military-style automatic rifle, fired a shot, and demanded to be taken to the basement of the restaurant so he could free the enslaved, sex-enslaved children. Now, there is no basement. Of course there were no children. This is complete fabrication, and it is fortunate that the customers and employees were not injured in this incident, and the man was arrested. But the potential for disaster was there. It's a restaurant where parents take their kids to eat. It is not a leap to worry that such a thing could happen to a newsroom.
Well, let's ask you then, we saw in that report from Phoenix the tensions running high on both sides, on both extremes, the story you've just told us about the pizza restaurant. I mean, how much is that the real America then that we're seeing?
Well, my view is that neither America is more real than the other. No one's America is more real than anyone else's. Here's what bothers me. It seems to me, in the piece that your correspondent did, at one point there was an argument on the street over statistics and over facts, and we ought to be able to agree on that. You know, the Pulitzer Prizes have been around for 101 years, and all the journalists and playwrights and authors and poets and composers who have won Pulitzer Prizes shared one thing in common, which is that they were all engaged in a search for the truth. And we must believe that there is truth, that truth does exist, and that it can be ascertained as near as possible, and that perhaps we can agree on at least what the facts are. And then let's argue about them. But let's agree on what the facts are. And now, sadly, that sort of consensus about literally a chronicle of events, an encyclopedia of facts, that consensus, frankly, seems to have broken down here.
When you look at a Harvard University report which studied the coverage that President Trump got in his first 100 days, in print and on TV, it reported that the coverage was 80% negative. How fair is it then to say that perhaps this isn't wholly a one-way street, that there is some blame from the media, for the media?
I suppose it's a matter of degree. I mean, I certainly can't or wouldn't defend every single story that has been written, but this is a president who speaks in ways no president has, including total disregard at times for fact, and that is just the truth. And so if he does it again and again, if he does it 4 times in a day, which is not uncommon, then it will be reported 4 times in the day, and the 5th story will report that he said something that actually is based in fact, and so there you have your 80% negative and your 20% positive. It's an unusual situation, granted, but what are we to do except report the facts as we know them?
Well, that's what you and your colleagues must do. How much are you and your colleagues in the press and the media generally, how much are you almost victims here of some kind of cultural conflict that's being played out?
You know, I don't think we're victims at all. I think we are, you know, we are certainly privileged to do what we do. I've done it my entire career, and I think journalism is an incredible way, an incredibly fulfilling way of seeing the world, and I think it provides a real public service. But yes, there is a cultural divide in the United States. I'm not sure we fully understand its dimensions and its potential staying power, but it exists, and you know, we'll report on it and try to understand it and try to help Americans understand it.
And is it in any way fueled, or to those who would suggest it's possibly fueled by a bitterness? The position that the media enjoyed up until this president was pretty strong, but now we have a president who takes to Twitter, who goes over the heads of you and your colleagues. How much is that fueling it from the media side?
Well, certainly we're in a new era when the president, who has umpty million followers on Twitter, is able to communicate directly with that many people without the intermediation of the media. That is something we all have to get used to. We also have to get used to the fact that on the web, the traditional barriers of entry to be a major player in media have fallen. So you don't have to build a printing plant and buy ink by the barrel and paper by the ton and hire pressmen and all of that. In fact, you set up a website, and on the web, we're all equivalent, basically. And so that's a new environment, and we have to sort of live by our wits and trust that the cream rises to the top.
Briefly, is this sustainable?
What
the relationship between the White House, the president, and the media?
Well, it will be sustained because there will be the White House and there will be the media. The relationship, I hope, matures and cools off some, but we will have to work through this because neither of us is going anywhere.
Eugene Robinson, thank you for your time this evening.